Honeybees are the most common pollinators in the United States. But did you know the most common honeybee isn't actually native to the U.S.? The western honeybee is the most popular honeybee in this country, and it was founded in Europe and Western Asia.
And it was brought into the North America first by Spaniards, not for the honey, but for the wax to make candles, which is kind of interesting. And then the colonists brought honeybees with them. So we as humans have taken the western honeybee with us and spread it worldwide because we're managing to use it for pollination, but we also get the benefit of getting honey out of it. For those who haven't tasted a lot of different types of honey made from different parts of the country or coming from different types of flowers. It's almost like tasting wine, that you have a huge variety of different flavors and tastes that you can get from the honeys.
That's Dr. Diana Cox-Foster, research leader at the Pollinating Insect-Biology Management Systematics Research Unit in Logan, Utah. Cox-Foster studies bees and pollinators of all kinds. And believe me, there's more types of bees than you think.
There's over 20,000 species of bees worldwide. And here in North America, we have over 4,000 species. And the reason I say over is because we think there's a lot of bees out there that we have not yet identified as species. So there's a lot more to be discovered. The majority of those bees are pollinating plants, flowering plants, and are very important to both natural ecosystems and also to agriculture.
Cox-Foster is studying not only how bees forage within their own species, but also how they work in tandem with other species, and how that benefits growers. In the Northeast, for example, honeybees and native bees work together to pollinate apples and other plants.
The more different kinds of bees you have, the greater your fruit yield is, and the larger the apples will be, the grade out higher. So the growers actually benefits by attracting all the bee species that they can.
We hear so much about honeybees, which are social insects, meaning they work in groups. There are also stingless bees, such as carpenter bees, and bumblebees, whose colonies actually live a year. But the majority of native bees in the United States are actually solitary, meaning they work alone.
You have to think of solitary bees, like each female bee is like a single mom. She goes out and she gathers pollen and nectar and creates her own nests, lays an egg, seals it off, and goes on to make new nests. And then she actually never encounters her offspring. I'd say 90% of the bees that we have in North America are solitary bees.
Here at the Bee Lab in Logan, they house the National Pollinating Insect Collection with over 2.3 million different specimens.
This is very valuable. Part of our research is figuring out who the bees are and where they're found, and that's what we can use the collection for. It's a historical record, because we know that a lot of the bee species have been having a lot of stress, and the populations are declining or in danger of various things. We can go back to bees that were collected 80, 100 years ago and still get DNA from those bees, and we can learn a lot from those genetic sequences about different traits that bee has.
Cox-Foster also uses the collection to study how bees interact with different plants. For example, she's studying how bees can help seed production in alfalfa. Alfalfa is one of the most widely grown crops in the United States. Growers of alfalfa depend heavily on solitary bees to help propagate their crops, including the alkali bee.
This is an incredibly beautiful bee. It has these brilliant iridescent blue, green, yellow stripes on the abdomen. It digs its nest down in the ground, and that's where it brings the pollen and nectar and lays its eggs. And the growers of these alfalfa who make use of this bee actually create specialized bee beds. Some of the growers have told me that they value their bee beds more than they value their homes. But they can also make use of the alfalfa leaf-cutting bee, which is a solitary bee. Somehow it got introduced from Europe into North America in the 1940s, and it spread across many different states, but now it's one of the bees that we can make use of for alfalfa seed production, as well as canola and also blueberries. And we're also asking, can it be used for other crops, like even pollinating raspberries inside hoop houses or controlled environment agriculture.
Integrated pest and pollinator management is another focus of our work. How to balance the needs of the grower while protecting pollinators from pesticides.
How can we choose the pesticides that are less harmful to the bees or how to apply those pesticides when they won't affect the bees. So we do a lot of work on sensitivity of bees to pesticides, also working to help provide EPA with essential data and to agrochemical companies who are concerned about protecting bees on how some of these other bees are exposed to pesticides. What's the risk to those bees?
Another interesting aspect of Cox-Foster's research is bee compatibility, how different bee species can work together, and how growers can take advantage of that working relationship. They're seeing this in Northern California, where honeybees and blue orchard bees, also called mason bees, pollinate almond orchards together. The results are greater yields for almond producers. California is the biggest producer of almonds in the world, by the way.
We don't understand why they work so well together that you get this greater pollination, and that's one of the questions we want to ask. But there are other farmers too, even like soybean farmers, that now know certain varieties of soybeans are highly attractive to honeybees and to the other bees, and that adds a significant amount of pollination yield on top of their crop. Like even in California this year with all the rain that came in. So the blue orchard bees were out actively doing pollination, whereas honeybees don't like rain. They don't like cold temperatures, so they stay in the hive. The two of them together, it's sort of like you're guaranteeing pollination. And I think we've developed means now that the single bee manager, like a beekeeper, could make use of both species and help with the pollination there. The greater you're encouraging diversity of your bees and getting them to live in your area, the better off you are too.
Cox-Foster works closely with mason bees because they're so important to growers in the West. Not only are they native to the region, but they're an early spring bee, which is especially valuable to almond and apple growers whose crops bloom in February and March. The key is to provide a good home to these valuable bees, so they stay and propagate year-round. Cox-Foster and her team are showing growers how to make these tiny nest boxes to entice the mason bees to live where they work.
We call them fiesta boxes, sort of like a little mailbox, and then a bundle of straws that are in their particular diameter, and then they need mud also. We work with growers sometimes to get a source of water to create a mud patch out in the field. They fly back and forth and they create a little mud depression or soil depression, collect the pollen and the nectar and bring it in, lay an egg, and then keep building out. And if they fill up one straw, each female claims their own straw and leaves a little mark on it so they know whose is whose.
Speaking of homes, despite our vast research into bumblebees, there's still so much we don't know about what happens inside their colonies. As Cox-Foster noted, bumblebee colonies are often small and typically have a small workforce.
We wanted to figure out when they were foraging and how many were foraging, what times a day. We're looking at interactions of species. And we were asking an important question about how a honeybee apiary impacts other bees that are out there.
In order to collect this information, Cox-Foster and her team partnered with a company to develop smart bombus units, which are gates placed inside the colonies that monitor the movement of the bees.
And it is a system where we have gates the bees go in and out of, and monitors records when they go in and out. It gives us this information, but we're getting a lot more too from it, like what's the temperature inside the colony, what's the temperature outside. So we're actually learning a lot about bumblebees that we didn't know about before.
It seems like the more researchers learn about bees, the more questions they have. I asked her if that was a good thing.
I think that's a good mark of any kind of science, that you answer one question and all of a sudden you got 5 or 10 more questions to follow up on. It's choosing the ones that are going to get us to the next step in agriculture production. Part of our mission is ensuring pollination in the natural ecosystems too, in the wild. And I think that's part of the reason being a scientist. You keep learning new things and all of a sudden you realize how little you know that there's many more things to discover.
You'll want to tune in next week when we go on the hunt for a vicious predator that can wipe out an entire hive in minutes.